How did the cabal fraudulently replace common law with maritime law? It was a very sneaky thing they did, right? So what I'm going to do to explain it all is I'll be using the USA as an example to describe how the cabal basically destroyed the original US Constitution and converted, or should I say, converted the Republic of the USA into a corporation in 1871. So guys, this is the same model that the cabal has basically used to do exactly the same thing in virtually every country around the world. So guys, the USA was experiencing their second bankruptcy in 1871 due to the Civil War, which occurred between 1861 and 1865. What I want you to remember is that, as usual, the cabal was involved in fueling the flames of the conflict. You know, that they started it. And as usual, as expected, guys, they also financed both sides of the conflict. So they financed the South and the North. So no matter who won the conflict, right, they were certain, as they always are, that they always backed the winner. So by 1871, the USA was in dire financial straits because of all the money they spent on the war. So as such, guys, they were forced to make an extremely unfavorable deal with the cabal, or should I rather say the international banksters, the bank gangsters, right? The only way that the cabal would loan the floundering nation of the USA money was with severe, extremely unfavorable conditions and horrible stipulations, right? So the devious plan that the banksters devised back in 1871 was called the Act of 1871, in which they effectively, guys, took back complete control of the USA. The Act of 1871 changed the USA from a republic controlled by the people to a corporation which was governed by the independent state of the District of Columbia, or Washington, D.C. Guys, what they basically did was they deviously created the independent District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. after the first US bankruptcy, right? Namely after the War of Independence against Britain, which ended in 1776. So the first US bankruptcy was 1776 after the War of Independence, and the second one was 1871. So from 1871 onwards, the original constitution was replaced with a new one, and the USA effectively, guys, fell under the control of the independent states of the Vatican, independent state, and the independent state called the City of London. At that time, guys, the president also became the chief executive of the corporation or the board of directors. In other words, the corporation of the United States. Guys, the entire plan was orchestrated using maritime law, right? So the whole point behind maritime law was to deviously fool people into believing that the United States was still a republic. So how did they do that, right? Well, let's first of all answer the question, why was maritime law in place, right? So the reason that maritime law, or the law of the sea, applied at the time was because the USA never ever signed a peace treaty with Britain after the War of Independence, which ended in 1776. It was just a surrender. Guys, that was just another very sly ruse by the cabal to deviously manipulate humanity into a new legal system, namely maritime law, without their consent. Guys, the subtle but devious difference between the republic and the corporation was achieved by using a very, very sly method, as you'd expect from the cabal, right? Namely, where they merely, all the cabal did was they capitalized the name of each country so that it appeared the same to the casual observer, right? So to a casual observer, it looked the same, but in reality, everything changed, right? From belonging to the people, in other words, the country went from belonging to the people to now belonging to the criminal cabal banksters, or bank gangsters, as I call them, right? The difference is the Republic of the USA is written in just capital letter for the first letter, but for the corporation, the entire United States of America is written in capitals. So, guys, to the casual observer, those two names appear pretty much the same. But nothing could be further from the truth, right? Capitalization in terms of maritime law is very, very significant, right? Because what it does is it changes the status of an entity from being a lawful entity, which is subject to God's laws, prime creator's laws, to instead embrace the construct called legal, which means, or should I rather say, which then subjects humanity to not God's laws, but man's legislation. So this seemingly minor alteration, guys, has had a massive negative impact on all generations which have followed since 1871. So by changing countries from a republic to a corporation, people basically were robbed of their common law rights granted by God, prime creator, and instead they became subject to man's legislation, or should we rather say legislation created by man. Humanity thus lost their inalienable rights guaranteed by God, and instead humanity basically was granted relative rights or privileges by the new corporation. So it's no longer a republic, it's now a corporation. The country's a corporation. So a simple example, guys, of what they did was travel. So under common law, guys, prior to the Act of 1871, people could travel freely without requiring a passport, etc. But since 1871, the corporate governments, which manage countries, grants their citizens rights and privileges according to their whims. Things like passports, etc., driving licenses, passports, licenses to run businesses, etc. So understanding the difference between common law and maritime law, guys, very, very important. So in this video, we're going to try and highlight the crucial differences, right? So to understand the difference between humanity standing in terms of common law versus maritime law, guys, we need to first unpack a couple of terms. The first term, guys, is legal in terms of maritime law. So the term legal applies to maritime law, and lawful, the term lawful, applies to common law. So the first thing I want you to do, guys, is to understand, not understand, understand how differently these terms are interpreted in each case, right? And let's compare the term lawful to legal, right? The first terms to understand are the diametrically different terms or meanings of the word lawful and legal. Lawful, guys, describes the inalienable rights humans have been granted by God, prime creator, and relates to real living people. So let's see. Under common law, God or prime creator recognizes every living person as sovereign with the capacity to represent themselves. Property and personal rights are inherent and completely inviolable. In other words, you cannot remove people's property rights at all. Human rights are endowed by God and cannot be infringed upon unless, there is one reason, right? Unless the person is causing harm to others, their community, or any other being. They're also referred to as what we like to call a secured party creditor. Guys, what that really means is it describes the lawful status of individuals as free humans or free people, and sees people as living and able to contract and represent themselves. The basis of common law is based on the premise, one simple premise: do no harm. That's the major premise associated with common law. In simplistic terms, anything is lawful as long as no person, thing, or being is harmed or negatively affected by the actions or behavior of another. Pretty simple, isn't it? So legal, guys, is a very different term. Legal refers to the privileges, licenses, and temporary rights which a corporation can, at its discretion, grant to other corporations which fall under its jurisdiction. Let's have a look at what maritime law actually means to humanity, right? So under maritime law, all babies are registered as a corporation at birth. So basically, when your mother registers you, you get issued a birth certificate, and that birth certificate then recognizes you as a corporation. So just as corporations masquerading as countries, right, have their names capitalized to define them as corporations, so too do humans. So on our birth certificate, our name is also capitalized, which shows that we are chattel and belong to the corporation, and we fall under maritime law. So once your birth certificate is issued, guys, each human is registered as a corporation, and they're actually viewed as dead or lost at sea. It's crazy stuff. Guys, this is why you require an advocate to speak on your behalf in court. You cannot speak on your own behalf because you are viewed by the court as dead and lost at sea. The corporation is referred to as your straw man, is then traded on various exchanges around the world, and you are seen as a mere commodity, chattel, or a slave in the system. So as a corporation, guys, you then, because you're recognized as a corporation, once your birth certificate is issued, you fall under the jurisdiction of the country corporation, which is masquerading as the government of your country. So as the corporation is subject to maritime law or the law of the sea, every human who receives a birth certificate is also registered as a corporation and becomes subject to man's legislation, namely things like statutes, acts, rules, codes, legislation, etc. So under the devious criminal system, guys, humans, us chattel, have absolutely no rights. It sounds crazy, but no, we don't. They only have privileges or temporary benefits granted to them by the issuance of licenses or the passing of legislation. So we lost our common law rights. So there are no property rights, guys. Corporations masquerading as people, right, are only granted temporary usufruct over their own property. So you never own a thing. You only have temporary usage, right? So let me give an example of how that works. So if you don't pay your illegal property taxes on the property you own, the government can seize your property. It sounds crazy, but that's the truth of it, right? Guys, legal privileges are granted on a temporary basis and can be revoked by the government at any time. Madness, right? Chattel, guys, humanity, are viewed as accommodation party debtors, which means that humans are unable to access their straw man or the value in their straw man, which is defined as a corporation. So your straw man is a corporation which has a value in terms of the cabal and you're traded on exchanges, etc. So what does this all mean, guys? Guys, the earth there is still some cabal control going on, is ruled by a small group of amazingly evil fraudsters, guys. And this has been going on for a very, very long time. Guys, these evil monsters have deployed extremely nefarious methods to entrap humanity under a devious legal and governance system, which is very favorable to the cabal, but one, guys, which severely disempowers humanity. Let's answer the question, guys. So what does the future look like? Fortunately for humanity, guys, a group of incredibly amazing people, right? From the West, they were called the White Hats, orchestrated a generational plan to free humanity from the clutches of the cabal, deep state, or as they should be known, the Khazarian mafia. Simultaneously, guys, but independently, there was a second group in the East called the White Dragons. They also devised a plan to defeat the evil Khazarian mafia. Guys, these two groups worked independently of each other for decades, but eventually realized that by working together, they would achieve even greater success. So that's what they decided to do. Guys, the sustained efforts of these two incredible groups, the White Hats from the West and the White Dragons from the East, culminated, guys, in the election of Donald Trump in the West. And over time, the White Dragons have worked very successfully to remove the Communist Party in China as well.